Okay, so we're live. To anyone watching this now or in the future, I'm Patrick Stewart, kind of a purveyor of hipster OSR trash, and we are meant to be interviewing Bryce Lynch and Gabor. It's Gabor Lux, correct?
Yep.
Okay, who's also known as Melan, who both of these guys have done a lot of stuff for the OSR and a lot of D&D related stuff. Bryce isn't here yet, which is not a huge surprise, but Gabor is. So I'd like to begin with you to start with. I'm sure the 20 people who watch this will all know who you are already, but in case anyone watches it who doesn't know who you are, could you describe briefly your career or your relationship with D&D up until now?
With the gaming scene. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, my name is Gabor and I have been gaming since 1991. And my relationship with old school gaming started actually way back. I was disenchanted for a very long time with what was then official gaming, the TSR second edition era, and dropped out. And when I returned with Palladium Fantasy and then third edition, I found Necromancer games, and they were among the first to think about returning to the old style of gaming and looking back at what is useful from this past. And it sort of stuck, so I got involved, published things for free, was in a lot of discussions, wrote for fanzines, and so on and so on. So I have been here for a while.
So your career, I won't say career, but your interaction with the community basically predates the massive internet changes that happened around, I guess, from the 90s to the noughties. Is that right?
Yeah, but it has been brewing for a while, even before the term OSR became standardized. You had people from Dragon's Foot. You had the Oddities, which was a fanzine for, I think, basic D&D mainly. And yeah, I actually, my first game writing, which was published, was for Chaos Ultra, which was something called a Disc Mag, basically a fanzine for a computer that you would trade around on floppies.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it goes back a little while.
At Disc Mag, okay. And you've also done a whole bunch of, like, there's a whole series you've done on dungeon design, and you've got various different things on different websites to do with, you have your own version of the Old School Primer, and a whole range of reviews, and your own zine as well, and a blog, Beyond Full Heights, is that right?
Yep. Yep, it has the zine is something I have been wanting to do for a very long while. I really started to like this style of making scenes in the early noughties, 2000s, and I have been planning it for a very long time, and now this year I started it finally. It was hard to make the jump, but yeah, I think, and it will go as long as it entertains me and it entertains other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I did have a question here that I think, well, was specifically for you. This is from Jan Abajian. I hope I've pronounced that properly. It was about being a non-native English speaker, at least in European, in an RPG scene dominated by English speakers and North Americans. So he wanted to know if your own culture gives you a different view on RPGs than the average RPG author. Yeah. So how has that affected you? And if so, do you think it's also changed the way you look at games?
Well, it is hard to speak about this because, well, on one hand, you could say that I might have an outsider's view on old school because I started gaming way after it was all over, after the classical TSR and Judges Guild period in early 90s, and a different part of the world. But in as much as my links to Hungarian gaming culture and Hungarian game design and adventure design, I have mostly been trying to get away from it.
Really?
Yeah. That's it has been getting better, but when in the 1990s and early 2000s, it was really a wasteland of bad adventure design. You know, I will talk about this in more detail later, but you have this wrong way of making adventures, which tries to make basically the failed novelist model that overly long introductions, non-play relevant information, blatant railroading, GMPCs, and all that. And that was very much the state of the scene that time. My group was doing things in a reaction to that.
Right.
I have changed things here and there, but you know, just like the OSR, it has been going on for a while, and there has been a lot of collected, let's say, insight or whatever. But when you look at the mainstream of adventure publishing, you still see a lot of stuff that's the 90s again and again, and they are non-functional. So you can change some things a little bit, but maybe not everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of my experience, my G plus circle is like a wide range of people from the Anglosphere, basically. So I get a lot of people from America, and then there's a scattering of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And then there's a few oddities spread out all over the world, but only like pinpricks of them. Sometimes expatriates, sometimes like the occasional English speaker from somewhere else. So I do wonder, imagine in each of those countries, or many countries, there's like a deep culture that I don't have access to and that I never see because it doesn't interact with my web of people, apart from moments like this. Is there anything from the Hungarian scene that stands out to you now that you would like people to know about? Anything like, do you have the secret knowledge of the Hungarian RPG scene that you?
Yeah, there is no big secret, unfortunately. But what I would like to, if there are two things which I would like to let people outside Hungary know about, is early 90s pulp fantasy novels. There were some of these were based on very specifically on AD&D campaigns, basically campaign journals, and they really had a great style which captures the wildness of first edition AD&D specifically, and you can see traces of you know, the Secret of Bone Hill and the first UK module. I don't recall the title. These were great, and I think these would stand up very well. The other one is a sort of genre mixing series that was sort of, you could sum it up in the phrase dragons versus helicopters.
Oh,
so you basically throw together a lot of disparate elements, and that was wild. It really influenced how I look at the hobby. I wish these were translated, and maybe one day they will.
That's fascinating. It's a slightly off topic, but I have become recently aware of, like, in Japan, there's a massive culture of writing about like computer games or online RPGs or like computer RPGs, and producing these kind of game books which are almost descriptive, but also kind of breach out into other like areas. And there's like different like kinds of them. There's like a staggering amount of them if you get into it. There's a huge amount of people not just writing about it as if they're in the world of the game, but writing about it as if they are playing the game, almost descriptions of game playing in depth. It's kind of the fascinating loop between description and play, which is what your statement reminded me of.
That's interesting, interesting loop, really. I think it's bigger than the actual gaming scene over there.
Yeah, you might be right. It's interesting. I'd like to ask about your, like, basically your play environment, because I noticed from different gaming cultures and different like groups of people, the ways in which they expect to play, like the places, the people, and the like the numbers and the frequency have a big effect on what they write for, what they look for in adventure design. So like I thought with DCC, there was a really big con scene with DCC, and they write these very focused, relatively tight con games with like a high amount of relatively controlled fun. of a particular kind designed to appeal to like a wide variety, and it has like some reasonable locks to stop people freaking out. There's a lot of thought put into stopping people doing crazy shit. And then I guess for other people who have like long-term game groups, they can run for long-hour sessions. They have different priorities. And for me, I tend to run with people I know online. And I tend to run weekly sessions and play in weekly sessions of about 3 hours each because I can't go from a lot online. And so most of my play aids are based around these like chunky short sessions. So I was wondering if it's okay to ask like how regularly you play, how big the group is, how familiar you are, and how long your sessions run, that kind of thing.
Well, I live about 250 kilometers from my regular gaming group. I had one locally, but because of children and other commitments, it sort of fall apart. So I game every 3 weeks, 2 days, and we have to kind of squeeze quite a lot into maybe a 5-hour slot. So we try to get focused, but of course, our games are really these meandering threads. We have typically some sessions which are very much focused on action, and then some which are exploration, going off on tangents, and these are typically fairly open games, very reliant on improvisation.
Right. And then these all in open worlds where you can pretty much wander. So there's like bell to bell because you travel around.
Yeah. That's of course the trap of sandbox gaming is that without motivation, it can fall apart and people move away. There is no focus to it, no direction.
Yeah, you have to work, I think, as a player to just decide that your character is obsessed with something or wants to make something happen. So otherwise, it becomes very splintered and there's a lot of decision fatigue and the group wanders a lot.
Yeah, and there is also decision paralysis, that you can do anything, and what is anything? Well, I have no idea. I can go in any direction. Okay, I don't know where to go. So what I think works is that if there is sort of an initial campaign pitch that focuses the course of action, like in our current campaign, it's a mysterious inheritance which really feeds into a lot of local conspiracies and the mysteries of an island, so a self-contained mini setting. Another events, it was the classical amnesia plot, which is the best way to run exotic settings, because you don't know anything about these places. The player doesn't know anything. The character doesn't know anything. It is all in balance.
I've forgotten how many times I've washed people up on an island after a shipwreck, where it's just like it's a new environment and you know each other from the ship, so you're already friends. And then if one of you dies, it looks like, oh, another survivor has turned up, who you also know. I kind of almost half like the moments decision paralysis you can sometimes get in old school games at the beginning, not because they're good, but because they put a kind of pressure on the players to basically interpret the immediacy of the environment and decide what to do. And sometimes it goes horribly wrong and they just like flail. But usually someone or a group of people has to just decide now to instill the game with meaning, to take the world that they're in and say, like, okay, this means something and I care about this particular thing right now. And it's interesting to both be part of that process and to watch it happen amongst other people. Although sometimes you have to watch it not happen, which means it can be painful and unpleasant, but it's a curious thing to put that kind of stress on people.
Yeah, I think we are on the same page here, that it is fascinating to see it sort of happen at the table. You don't have any plan and something develops, and like our campaign started with this premise of the inheritance and was immediately derailed by the first random rumor, and by the second session the players were slaves on a galley which they immediately recaptured and went off sailing around various islands. And you have to know your players, I think. that some people start out with this broad set of possibilities and immediately start thinking about pulling off heists and making something of this environment, which, as you said, is great. And sometimes some people need guidance, or they become trapped. And I'm not saying I'm very much against railroading, but instigating some conflict is very advisable in that situation.
Yeah, I've also started in media as a bunch of times where it's like you're falling from the window or you've been trapped,
Yeah.
something like that. Okay, I will kick into some of the questions that were left online because Bryce has betrayed us by not turning up.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the one that I thought applied to you more than Bryce, which is Simon Forster wanted to ask how important you think maps are to an adventure.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm very map oriented. But maps in, maps out. I got into gaming. I think you are interested in speleology, no? Caves.
I've never actually gone underground, but yes, it was.
Oh, okay. I thought you were sort of actively involved, because I got into gaming through caves. My dad was into that scene somewhere on the margins, and we had a big book of cave maps. And then I found the Lord of the Rings, which also had maps. It sort of proceeded from there. So it's probably predictable that I ended up liking maps and how they work in the game, what they do for.
Do you remember your dad's caving maps? Because they're quite difficult to make and they can be quite beautiful as well. Yeah. They are a difficult investment of time.
Ironically, I think caves very often make for very bad dungeons.
Oh yeah, they're really they're incredibly bad.
I mean, really, Veins of the Earth does it well and creates a sort of something out of it, but the real caves are very often just one long corridor. And
yeah, because they're shaped by water mainly. Yeah. And then you dig through somewhere and find, oh, we found a new dead end. But for a caver, finding a new dead end is exciting because it's new. But for an adventure, it's terrible.
Yeah, but then some are really fascinating. And you have shoots going up and it's going. Something I really loved that when we were exploring a cave when I was a child, and there was a place. The cave was flooded with water. We were ankle deep in water, and there was just a place where it went underground under I think it's called a siphon, that you would have to swim down there, and there was something on the other side. You knew that, but it was a mystery, and this sense of mystery is very big too. The unknown. This is very big to the games I like.
Right. How do you think? So this is like a big polarity with anything to do with RPGs, which is we all want to create this sense of the numinous and of going into a wider world, and like things being beyond, and of players not knowing what's going on. And this conflicts on every level with how things work, because we're obsessed with systems. Things need to be able to be explained to the players. We need to comprehend the world so we can relate it. And so with maps, are there any maps from RPG products or anything else that stick out in your mind as being good at creating that sense of mystery, adventure, possibility?
Well, Judges Guild, definitely. That's really the gold standard of the classics. You look at City State of the Invincible Overlord, and there is something like Slave Market Plaza, and there is an alleyway behind the Plaza of Profuse Pleasures. Or just like that, I have some modules here. And for example, they published an installment. You can see it here for a little bit. Installment of a bunch of maps, and they are wonderfully complex. And you go down, there is a lava pit, there is an exit to Venus, and there are something that looks like railway tracks or a tunnel or something. So they were standout maps for that time. From modern gaming, for example, I have been really fascinated by the Twisting Stair fanzine by Alan Groy and Tony Roston. they return to this sort of classical mega dungeon design. They are great at what they are doing. Or the Tomb of Abysstor. That's a bit older than the old school series Necromancer games, 2002. And that's, for example, a great cave map.
Is there either of those two, like any particular element or synthesis or technique that stands out to you, that sticks in your mind as being something that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. From Tomb of Abysstor, I think it is the verticality of it, that it's something like 6 or 7 levels stacked on top of each other and connected by various chutes, secret and less secret ways. And you get a sense of exploration without it being overwhelming. It has variety from tomb complexes to evil temples, the natural environment of the underworld, the burial place of an ancient people. That's the lair of an evil wizard. So that's great.
I don't know if I have this kind of power hobby of I don't have time to play computer games. I know I just missed the boat on them anyway. Well, I'm kind of fascinated by the design and creation process. So I watch a bunch of YouTube channels which are all about games and how they're designed, and Dark Souls, which I've never played, but there have been a bunch of videos about that and about how it makes use in its levels of these spiraling three-dimensional structures. Which open up onto unexpected vertical transmission between levels, and where levels can link back and forth in unexpected ways, so that once you discover a passage, it can kind of link the top to the bottom and one level to another in ways that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, that's. I have never played Dark Souls, but I have checked out the videos, and they are really very interesting in how they work in 3D space. Actually, my other hobby is level design. I have made a bunch of maps for Save the Dark project, which is pretty much the gold standard of gaming for me. Thievery in a sort of steampunk world full of dark magic and labyrinths in cities. And I have made some maps for that, and its free sequel, The Dark Mod. What is interesting is that these level design and 3D construction, it translates into creating a role-playing game map as well. You can't have the same freedom of movement, but if you have a structure that the players can infiltrate by climbing up the walls or swimming inside through a water channel or infiltrating from behind, that's a very interesting experience. And it's interesting. One of the most famous level designers in the Thief fan community was Anthony Huso. He became a professional game designer, and now he's. I have his module right here.
Oh.
The mortuary temple of Esma, the city of he had a take on the fabulous city of Brass, and you can see that his vision of 3D spaces, his visual orientation is there in both hobbies.
I've always thought that working strongly in 3D would be harder in pen and paper than it would be in a computer game for some reason, because it can be challenging both to translate it into paper and then to translate the paper into, especially over a computer, into like the theater of the mind. I found describing things online especially strongly limits the cognitive load you can put on people, because there's only so much. Like, I think if you were in a table with them and you could show them a map or part of it, you can use much more complex structures. When you're running or playing, do your players literally map like they used to do in old school ways? Like, get the pen and paper out, count the feet going in certain directions, work out where the rooms are. Do you guys do that? Because I've tried doing it online and it's an effing nightmare. Because it's just really hard to do with there are multiple people playing and someone dropping in and out, and you don't know, and everything's going to a verbal description.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the problem. There go my old school credentials. We don't have a mapper. We don't have a caller. I map for my players on sheets of paper, typically.
Yeah.
when things get complex. So there is that you can't really have the same thing in 3D design and something that's mapped on a two-dimensional surface. You can sort of achieve a reasonable compromise, I think. But some people have unholy descriptive capabilities. I have heard that when Gary Gygax was running a con game, and yeah, he could describe a 10 by 10 room in a way that you could feel
Right.
the place.
Gygaxian prose, the source of Gygaxian prose. I'll ask you another question from our list. This is for Bryce, really, but Ian, here we go. Ian Riley wanted to ask, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on what can make vanilla fantasy interesting without simply veering into gonzo or Patrick-style hipster conversion.
Okay. Yeah, I have been thinking about the same thing, and the campaign I have been running these 2 years has been an attempt at. It isn't complete vanilla fantasy, but it's sort of close enough. I think it goes back to being sincere. That being, it is hard to express it, but I think vanilla works when it comes from the sources where these fantastic concepts come from. But a lot of our imagination is diluted through multiple media takes on it.
Right, yeah.
But let's say, if you want to do vanilla right, you have to go back to, let's say, Grimm's fairy tales and read the original texts, or well, even the household tales version, which are already less bloody and less horrifically full of sex and violence. But even then, going back to the roots, this is that's how you do it. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go on, please.
There was a process in the development of AD&D, an evolution that it went from relatively simple concepts. Here are the giants, kill the giants, and here is let's say, an evil temple. They are evil, they have undead, whatever. And it gradually became it started to cannibalize itself, build on its own mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is increasing complexity in game worlds. This is natural and actually pretty cool. But you can lose sight of what made the original so powerful. So vanilla is a bit like, good bread, or tomatoes that actually taste like tomatoes. Yeah. So
right.
You only have to put in flour and water and sort of yeast and whatever, but you have to be honest about it, and no additives and no flavorings, not artificial flavors.
That's curious to me. I do one think a lot about like the field of mirrors that popular culture creates, and to do something with intensity, conviction, and a lack of ironic distancing, just to present it clearly in something as itself, is something that an idea that has reoccurred to me many times. But it can be quite challenging for me anyway, especially when you're doing an RPG online, because there are always like different patterns of stress and awareness running through all the people playing, and so people tend to default back to burning off some of that stress, and then one of the first things they do is shift into irony, which is something that I try to avoid doing myself, but which is kind of almost like an instinct or a muscle that it's hard to not use.
It's my second nature as well, in a way, that a lot of what I write is it is very easy to go into sort of this Vancian satire thing where everyone is a sociopath, and the world is fundamentally corrupt to its core, and you're a bunch of assholes, basically, and nothing is for real. But there was a saying I had in my signature for a long time, and I really believe in it, that irony, this was just some smart guy on the internet, that irony is dangerous because it can be misunderstood, but it can also make you avoid responsibility. I think that's a pretty good way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's true, I think. I think that's so. This is an interesting question from Jacob Hurst. Uh, how do we get you to review expensive books without breaking your bank or rolling you down the slippery slope of indie authors corrupting you by inundating you with piles of free shit?
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't accept complimentary copies. I buy everything I review if I get it or download it for free because it is free from the beginning. That's all right. But if someone sends me something, I will not review it. So if you have a very crappy adventure that looks like it might get a bad review from me, you can send it to me and I will just throw it away, and I will not hurt you. Yeah, I basically just pick. BRYCE. This is a question for BRYCE, I think, because BRYCE is the champion. Really, he suffers for all of us.
Yes.
But I just pick up things that look like I might like. So let's say I will probably never ever review a Pathfinder adventure pass book because maybe some of them are good, not for me. Yeah.
Joseph Manella kind of reviews them by taking them apart and turning them from linear paths into like places, but he turns time into space and says, if you want to turn a Pathfinder adventure into like an old school one, you can do it like this. And that's kind of him reviewing it, because I don't think he would do it unless he really liked a lot of the things inside it. But it is like a challenging thing because I like making fancy high status shit because it makes me feel better about my life. So if I look over to and I see like a book with a spine on it and it's glossy, I feel slightly better about being Patrick Stewart. But there are big like tensions with that inside the old school community because often it's at its best when it's making like normal people making relatively cheap stuff. And then if you want people to review it, you're in a weird situation of sending them like a glossy high status book, and then you're in it's a difficult space. I also don't like review things on request. I only buy stuff like on impulse, and it's usually stuff I think I'm gonna like. And even then, if I get something a bad review, I don't really like doing it, especially because everyone knows everyone else, and no one's really rich, so it's not like there's an upper class you can rail against. It's a complex interweaving of like aesthetic concerns, but also personal like relationships, which is difficult, challenging to deal with. Yeah, I think that's more for Ben Milton or for BRYCE. Maybe if he does turn up, we can dump.
I have been wrestling with the same things that who am I to really criticize someone's labor of love? That's why a 3-star review, which is something like an average kind of thing, that's easy to write, but to really savage somebody's pet project is it feels like really hurting someone. So I buy things on gut feeling, mostly something that feels like it will be interesting, and then I sometimes force myself to but I don't review. For example, I no longer review these let's say 16-page modules which have 8 encounters in a linear goblin infested cave. These Keep of Borderland cast-offs. So they are very fun in play. Give me an adventure like that, and you can make a great session out of that basic material. But yeah,
it's something I think about a lot is the disagreeing with things or not liking things, because there are very, very like good moral arguments for not basically disagreeing with anyone, especially within culture ever, because you could hurt someone who's basically powerless. It's like lots of little resentments flow out from it. You're downgrading someone's work, and so there's a kind of invisible pressure that I feel to be basically happy. And I'm basically not like I'm more of like a chthonic, slightly unpleasant human being. And on the other hand, I feel like Ben Milton doesn't say anything. He rarely says anything negative about any of the books that he reviews. He's not dishonest, but he considers his job mainly to be helping the culture, I think, and so he gives the
Yeah.
best possible view of what he's looking at. And I'm not like that, and I do worry sometimes that you can get into this kind of like a thing that was said a while ago by some people was that a lot of people in the story game scene didn't like each other's games very much, but they were all at cons together and all on panels together, and so all you would hear is like, "This is great, fantastic, wonderful," and if no one's going to be like a mild arsehole and just point out why they don't like something, you can have an entire culture kind of that just becomes kind of like an Oprah audience where everything's great all the time and where there's no negative pull against anything.
Yeah, that's it. That's the psychology of that is interesting. I very much liked the old internet a little bit more when people were a bit rougher, and people would say, "Go to hell, go fuck yourself, and please die," and then they also forgot about it for the next day, and that's I think healthier than enforced niceness, and behind you have this bubbling resentment. In some cases, it's a hard balance because then, of course, you have communities which are really about tearing people, each other apart. And
yeah, they do tend to swing hard one way or another. Like you're either protecting the victims, in which case everything devolves into like a kind of like a hug box, or you go the other way and it turns into just like a feral wolf pack of like lunatics tearing at each other. But there does seem to be like a pendulum where if you tip a little bit one way, after a few years, it's going to keep going, and you'll end up way on the extreme. It's strange but interesting. Let me see. Dave Sugars wanted to know, regarding layout, do you prefer game mechanics to be separated from fluff or integrated into it? I think this relates more to games themselves rather than adventures, but I do tend to have some mechanics inside them. I'm guessing you prefer them separated. Well, that's my interpretation.
Once again, please.
It says here, what do you prefer game mechanics regarding layout? Do you prefer game mechanics to be separated from fluff? I think that means description, or integrated into it.
Oh, yeah. I don't think the fluff and crunch division is really useful. It's an artificial thing. Good game writing, I think, can integrate it. But whatever works for you. I mean, you could theoretically have a sidebar or a side box with all the statistics and the rest of the content. But I don't like the word fluff. That's lore. I hate lore.
Really?
Because it sort of posits that a game has gameplay, and then it has something that's outside it that you read for, like a bathroom reading or whatever, and it should be meshed together, I think.
It's interesting. I have this tension as well because with my writing, I like to bang on a lot and use a lot of fancy crap, and it's part of the reason people like some of my work. But it's also like a major tension between, which I think FM Geist wanted to ask mainly BRYCE about, but she wanted to ask, where would you say the line is between evocative and opaque?
Yeah.
The happy medium between something that really anchors the description and something that makes readers scratch their heads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I will be the coward of that saying. It's in between. Like, let's look at Jack Vance. I really like this example because Vance is one of the kings of flowery language, but his prose is extremely economic and extremely effective. It's really straightforward to the point, like a musical piece, and that's I think the best kind of game writing is that it has flavor and it is effective.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's nice to have both, but difficult to like a major challenge, I think, to get both at the same time. I'm never really happy with anything that I've done in regarding to that. Like I look at it one day and I think it's gone too far one direction. Then I look at it another day and I think it's gone too far the other direction. And I've not been able to find there's never been something that I tick and been like, genius, Patrick. except in public where I pretend everything I do
Yeah,
is cheap.
but it's I think it's also quite good to achieve the sort of view on your writing that okay, I did this, it has advantages, it doesn't work here, it could be better there, but I have done it, I have improved through writing it, and my next project is going to be learning. It will learn from these previous ones. So a sort of healthy uh, self-reflection, but not self-torment.
It's a nice thing to pull off if you can get it. Courtney asked, who do you think the adventures are written for?
Hmm. Well, that's a very broad question.
I know I thought I'm sure it would provoke you to say something interesting.
Yeah, but you could say, well, if you have to, well, if you need provocation, is that as people have people know, and it is blatantly obvious that most of the adventures out there which are being published are not being bought to be played or run. They
No.
are reading materials. So some maybe, and that applies to me that I game actively, but I typically run my own stuff, and sometimes I pick up a module and okay, let's play that, but that's rare. And a lot of people just read it as a sort of fiction and maybe as a source of indirect inspiration to get examples and
Mm.
ideas from them, to mine it for ideas, which is another phrase that's kind of no, not really. But there is a tension at the heart of this thing that between fiction and the utilitarian text. That's the big challenge of writing adventures. That yeah, what is it for? And that's where a lot of to return to one of the beginning points. That's where a lot of adventures fail. The mass industrial adventures, the Wizards of the Coast and Pathfinder and other adventures, is that they are not written with games in mind, but with reading material in mind. They are kind of bits and pieces of canon, and
Mm.
the sort of thing that you will never really run. You can't even run because it's a railroad and it would fall apart in your hands. But people buy it for their shelves or for bathroom reading or just like daydreaming about being gamers.
I have this yeah, daydreaming. I have this like ideal in my head that like I should at least have run everything I owned at least once to, and I had like a vague plan about looking at my shelf of crap and thinking I should make a plan to run all these games at least a little bit just so that I can have the vision in my head of like someone who really knows what they're talking about and doesn't basically isn't daydreaming about doing something. And then I looked at the volume of stuff that I owned and realized it was so close to impossible that it would drive me crazy. But yeah, like when it's a strange space to be reviewing something. So if I'm reviewing something, I am genuinely trying as hard as I can to imagine playing it and to imagine the process of playing what it would be like at a table, how difficult it would be to reference, how challenging it would be to understand, all of this happening in my head, and then writing down what I think it would be like. But I rarely play it myself. And it would be very difficult for Bryce, for instance, to play through any of like, and it becomes insane to ask you going to play
Oh
through.
no!
Yeah.
Even if you started going through his best adventures list, it would take a few years to. Uh, I've been thinking about that kind of campaign model that you would have a sandbox and just pull all the good old school modules in one place and construct the setting from the bottom up. That was part of the original idea between my current campaign, and then it just happened that this is good, but I could write something that's more specifically to my tastes, and it didn't happen. But if maybe if I was gaming every week or twice every week, then they would become quite more useful.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone does game twice a week, because I wonder. I'm reading Amber Dice List now, and it has a lot of descriptions of like play, descriptions of how the game was generated. It's quite interesting, and the gaming culture it's from is from one where you could get a group of people who have jobs, but they're free every weekend in the same friendship group in the same place to play for multiple hours every week for months or years. And that almost, I feel like it doesn't exist in a lot of places. Like there are university places where you can play with someone for like the same few years, and there's online. But this construction of like, yeah, we all know each other, and the game came out of our gaming culture. There are very few places where that happens today. Uh, I think it's because of the structure of people's lives, especially in the West. Everyone moves around too much. Anyone who can do useful work is usually doing it like they've got a job and they don't have like spare time doesn't exist, I think, to the
Yeah,
extent it doesn't in the 90s and definitely not in the 70s. And role playing is kind of a function of spare time, especially the kind we like to do because I think you like um you've talked like the stuff you want to do in old school being like reorienting yourself, finding out about the environment, dicking around, deciding what to do, going in no necessary particular direction is all a product of having time. And if you're at a con, you've got like 3 hours and then you're never going to see these people again. You can't do that. And it's completely reasonable to ask for a game that's like, it's going to give you a certain amount of fun right now. Uh, so yeah, that's curious to me that my gaming group is made up of people who they're either in America and they're gaming at 5 in the morning and they don't have to do anything else, or they're unemployed for a while, or they're in a different country and their clock basically means it's okay. But I'm snatching people's odd hours from all over the globe, these little fragments of free time they have in their own lives, and bundling them together in one thing. Uh, so yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't really going anywhere with that.
this is interesting how the availability of free time changes things. That I've been very fortunate to have a stable group for now for more than 11 years, yeah. And there is one player I have been playing with since 1992. That's I think a rarity.
It's,
But here we have old school gaming has a lot of advantages. We were when we were at college and we were playing third edition. You had these very elaborate miniature fights. They were absolutely great. I loved it. I've loved them since the gold box games like Pools of Radiance or Secret of the Silver Blades, and third edition does that. It's excellent for that purposes, but it takes a lot of time. You have to sort of run a 7 or 8 hour gaming session to make it work. But with old school gaming, these simplified, straightforward, action-oriented systems, you can cram quite a lot of exploration into. Uh, if you have 4 hours or 3 hours, you can get a meaningful session out of that. And you have models like the Mega Dungeon, assemble a team of rotating people, go down, have fun, and that's your game session. Or the West Marches model, that's for busy people, the ordinary people. It doesn't solve the problem. Well, really, the blessing of having children, because that's where game groups really go to die, and then
right.
then they come back after a few years. But yeah, as I said, my local group was pretty active, but then
Yeah, I do mock one of my players for persistently spending time with his children and family when he could be pretending to be in an imaginary world. Shameful. Uh, Roger, this does feed back into our discussion about law and your dislike of it. Roger Gina Sorella wanted to ask, what are some good examples, if any, of history and background writing that adds to an adventure rather than detract from it? Are there any?
yeah, well, if it's game oriented, it's functional and not too long. Yeah, that can be useful. It is just that people people who kind of grew up too much on the Lord of the Rings appendices and have to have a very very complex view of everything that can bog down an adventurous setting. Yeah.
It's a curious thing. One of the things that's very hard to do in a multiplayer role-playing game is to actually read a book. Because in Oblivion, like an old PC game, I would run around this imaginary world, and because all these people had libraries in their houses, and the game developers had been allowed to write their own books, so if you pulled a book off a shelf, you'd read an imaginary history written by a game developer. So I'd break into these imaginary people's houses and just sit there reading their books, because there was books I was playing on my own. So I would go in, I paid for a PC to run this game, and I would just go into and read a text page for like half an hour, and then run away. But in an RPG, you can't really read a book like that because that level of densely integrated information, you can't absorb it with a group of people there. You can have like a moment you say, oh, okay, you've read the book and now you have the secret knowledge, but you can't do it yourself. It's kind of interesting. We see Chris Hall. What do you think of the recycling of classic adventures, mining TSR's past for content?
Oh yeah.
This is a new approach, obviously, but do you see Wizards of the Coast putting out new adventures themselves, or just relying on community content through the DM's Guild? With the OSR putting out great stuff, should anyone care?
Yeah, it's such a sadness, that it's creative bankruptcy, that they have no new ideas. It would be different if they took the classics and learned from that. But what we have are sort of new school adventures wearing the faces of the old beloved classics, and sort of not doing anything really, as far as I have seen, not doing anything good with them, not anything interesting. I would rather see an adventure that, say, learned from the ideas of Keep on the Borderlands and made a new adventure on these principles than a retreat. But there are, of course, sometimes it works out, like the Necromancer game's take on Caverns of Trachea, the Jacques Weiss adventure. That was quite successful, and sometimes I think it can work, but if it's just retreating the same ground again and again and trying to build a brand out of Against the Giants, that's sad.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons. Well, I'm just massive shameless hipster, partly because I'm an egotist, but also because I feel like popular culture is kind of choking on its own vomit, really. The regurgitation. I was just kind of obsessed with trying to do something, anything new, just something that basically just stabbed into the minds of like the reader like a knife, because it's kind of a disservice to anyone partaking in the culture to say, here's the 70s reheated, here's the 80s reheated, here's what you think you want, but it doesn't really apply to you. It's very frustrating for me on a variety of levels. I am kind of a big, terrible reactionary about like corporations chewing on their own cud.
Okay, please.
I have a question here from Matthew Schmier. Specifically for you, how would you update your treatise on linear versus branching adventure design given the current of 5e and DCC RPG adventures?
Well, I don't have anything interesting to say about this topic. I said everything I had to say in 2006 and whatever, and I have been practicing it, but I haven't been advancing it as a theory. I sort of think maybe I'm a bit tired of being associated with just that one.
It's the maps guy.
Please read something more recent I have written, because I have ideas about other things too. But no, really, the lessons probably still apply, because outside our narrow little circle, much of it is still unlearned. I know that, let's say, people like Mike Mears read sort of old school discussions and try to figure out how to apply them. That's fine, and you don't have to follow me. You should just read it and think about it and come up with your own ideas. That's the best thing. but we are very often trapped in the bad practices of the 1990s.
Yeah, it's
And
because it's not like it's not alchemy or like you're not fucking going to Hogwarts. There's some pretty basic things in there that it would be easy for a corporate. You would think it would be easy, and even with speaking with Lost Minds of Pandora, it looked like they were trying to do some vaguely old school stuff.
mm,
It just kind of faded away. It's like why? Such a
it,
strange thing to me.
Fandelver is, yeah, it was Gus L's takedown of it is a classic, slightly nasty way of explaining how it really doesn't work, and on the surface, it should be good, but it's rotten in so many ways. You have the blatant, let's say, the loss of agency and decisions which don't really mean too much, and so on. And you could, yeah, not rocket science. This is something that you can instinctively get, but there you go. It's
Why,
still there.
why do you think there's no pressure on corporations to make better adventures? Because is it? I don't get it. Are people just happy with what they have? It's kind of usually you'd expect the market to say, no, this other thing is better, but it doesn't seem to happen very much with RPGs. Or maybe I'm just a lonely weirdo shouting from a tower, and what I think is good is irrelevant to the vast number of people playing.
It's hard to say. Well, a lot of it is, well, maybe not at Wizards. It doesn't apply to Wizards probably, but a lot of RPG writing, it's rotten as a business. That it's about people being paid by the word to sign away their rights forever, and it doesn't really pay to give it too much playtesting because it interferes with your work, and you should probably move on to computer game design because that's where the real money is. That's the lessons of today. Maybe not today's industry. Maybe it has already happened. I see less. Maybe it's possible that I'm isolated and I only interact with a narrow little slice of the hobby. I'm not really a part of the wider game culture anymore. Maybe.
No, I think it's the curse of the internet. It's almost there's like a sheath or a bubble around you of people who are like-minded, and like you can like break out of it momentarily, like a dolphin, you're kind of reaching out and touch other communities, but then just the sheer cognitive like inertia brings you back into this group of people who think like you, and that seems to be happening all over the world. It's difficult, in moment to moment, it's easy to say, well, I'll just go and look at some of the forum. But as a life pattern, it's very hard to shift to get out. It's like an invisible trap you can't really escape. You can't feel it most of the time. And it's kind of based around our basic idea to be around people who are like us. So it's feeding into this central human thing.
Yeah, you can actually change the way people think because the whole of old school gaming was very much against the conventional wisdom of game design. And yet here we are still 2000, and maybe if we started 2000 when some of the seeds were already there, and it's 18 years later. It's scary, and we are still there. And there is the community is there, the philosophy is there, and it has changed things for the better. But you can't change anything, and that's okay. You have to accept it. Just like if you want to, if there is something about Hungary, is that I try to introduce old school gaming to Hungary because I loved it so much. You have to check this out. And I discovered that it wasn't enough to just write a few adventure modules. I had to build a community around them and build a game system and so on. And it sort of worked. A lot of people have been inspired by the things I wrote in the mid and late 2000s, and the things have shifted a bit. But it is not a miracle. It is just something that's pretty nice in a limited fashion, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I'm happy with that.
I did have a question here. Well, if you and Bryce were here, a kind of a drama question, which you don't have to answer if you don't want to, because you'll know how great internet drama is. This is going to be for both of you. But is there anything that Bryce has written that you just simply disagree with?
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, it happens. It happens. I'm probably more forgiving than Bryce. But then he has reviewed a whole lot of much worse than I have. So I can understand his position.
Is there anything in particular that you like to bring up? You don't have to.
There is something, but I don't remember it. There is something where we differ quite substantially, but I just no, doesn't come to my mind.
All right. I think we've done an hour, and I think we've gone through most of our questions, and we've covered a lot of things that I wanted to bring up. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that hasn't come up?
Well, it's not that really. But I'm sort of the person you can bounce questions off, but I have issues coming up with sort of interject my own.
All right. I'm not going to ask the question about what you've been drinking, and I'm not going to ask Josh's question, which is about whether he's the greatest game designer. You did say you wanted to no longer be the map guy. So to finish off, we've got 4 viewers, and presumably maybe 5 or 6 more people might watch. Is there anything you want to tell the people about that they should buy of yours, which will blast the old map like idea from their minds?
Well, no idea.
What do you have out right now? You've got your zine, right?
Okay, yeah. I have been focusing on my zine. The second issue is out. It has a full small city in it, which was quite hard to get into, and I had to drop one of the adventures. So the issue would have had 2 shotguns, and now there is only one because the 2 didn't fit. But yeah, writing a zine has been really rewarding. I love doing it, and this is going to go on for as long as people and I both have an interest in it. And of course, I would like to publish a few things which are bigger than that. I have sort of a Tegel Manor inspired dungeon in the works.
Oh.
Sort of, we are play testing it. Just a moment. Right now, so that's kind of that's something that's going to come out, and I would like to publish the English version of Helvetia, my historical fantasy RPG, which is sort of based on Brother Grimm's tales, the original ones, on picaresque novels, but it is not a grim and gritty version of historical fantasy. It's light-hearted. It is about the less horrific side of historical fantasy. So sort of not Lamentations of the Old Flame Princess. Mainly the same time period, but it's a different take, and I think people might find it interesting when it comes out.
That will be interesting, yes. And if people want to grab your zine, where can they go to pick it up?
Well, I do have my blog, and there is an associated store on Big Cartel where I post my releases. Yeah, that's it. It's no big, not a big operation. Just right. Something I can go to the post with and mail it to you and whatever.
Okay, I think that finishes up everything I wanted to go over. I'm sorry Bryce didn't turn up, but Bryce, if you're watching, I condemn you to an hour of boredom at least for not showing up. And thank you very much for coming. It's been fascinating. Even though we couldn't get everyone here, it's still been really interesting, and hopefully people will enjoy it in the future. So
yeah, thanks for the interview, and yeah, do one with Bryce, and I will be there listening.
Right, exactly. Okay, thanks for your time, and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.